There is a specific quality to it, not a thought you manufactured, not a wish you dressed up as intuition. It arrives in the skin before it arrives in the mind, a warmth without a source. The faint, inexplicable certainty that somewhere, in some room you cannot see, a person is holding you in their awareness right now, not casually, not as a background noise, fully, the way you hold something you have been trying to set down and cannot. You feel it in the backs of your hands first, or in the stillness behind your shoulder blades, or in the particular quality of quiet that settles over you when nothing has changed on the surface, but something has unmistakably shifted in the field. This is not wishful thinking. Wishful thinking has a particular texture. It reaches outward, it grasps, it questions itself in real time. What you are feeling right now does not question itself. It simply is. A signal received before the mind had any business receiving it. You are here because something navigated you here, not the algorithm, not the search bar, but the part of you that has been tracking this connection below the level of conscious thought for longer than you have let yourself admit. Today, a specific planetary alignment formed in the sky, one that does not happen casually, one that requires years to arrive at this precise configuration, and it opened a window between timelines, between what was and what is becoming, between who was thinking of you then and who is thinking of you now. Before we go deeper, anchor yourself into this moment. Like this video, subscribe and comment below. I feel it. This isn't just a comment. It's an energetic declaration, a signal sent into the field that you're present and open to what arrives next. Because what arrives next is the part that changes the meaning of everything that came before it. Stay here. What you have built in the silence is not nothing. That is the first thing you need to understand, and not as comfort, but as a structural fact about what this transit is responding to. There is a reason this activation does not land in every field equally. The planetary energy moving through the sky right now is precise. It selects. It arrives in the space created by a specific kind of interior architecture, and that architecture is not built by wanting or by hoping or by simply waiting long enough. It is built by continuing to do the internal work when the work stopped producing anything visible. When the effort was real, but the external confirmation went completely silent. When you kept refining your understanding of yourself, kept revising what you actually needed versus what you had settled for, kept arriving at harder and truer questions, without a single external feedback loop to validate that any of it was registering anywhere, you did not stop. That is not a small thing. That is the exact thing this window was waiting for. Not because effort deserves reward in some karmic ledger, because the specific frequency this transit activates requires a receiver that has been calibrated to a certain level of precision. And precision in the interior life is not achieved by wanting things harder. It is achieved by continuing the work past the point where the work feels productive, past the point where the results are visible, past the point where anyone around you would have understood why you kept going. You kept going anyway. The door that opens today opens for that reason specifically. Now, here is what is actually happening in the sky above you. Jupiter, the largest presence in our solar system, the planet that governs expansion, abundance, and the moments when something that has been building invisibly suddenly becomes unmistakable. Jupiter sits at 8 degrees of Leo today. Leo is the sign of creative identity, the sign that governs what you radiate outward when you are fully, undefensively yourself. Jupiter in Leo does not produce quiet, modest growth. It produces the kind of expansion that becomes impossible to contain, the kind that spills past the edges of whatever container you had assigned it to. What Jupiter touches, it magnifies. What it moves through, it opens. Uranus sits at 5 degrees of Gemini. If Jupiter is the force of expansion, Uranus is the force of sudden, irreversible awakening, the planet that does not wait for permission to rearrange the architecture of what you thought was fixed. Uranus in Gemini works through the mind, through communication, through the invisible connections between people across time and distance. It governs the moments when a thought arrives from nowhere, or appears to arrive from nowhere, but is actually the surface appearance of a much deeper structural shift that has been building below the threshold of ordinary awareness. Uranus does not change things gradually, it changes them in a moment. The moment arrives without warning, and the thing that was one way is suddenly, permanently, another way. You know this sensation. You have felt Uranus before without knowing its name. In the moment, a realization arrived that you could not unarrive at. In the moment, you understood something about yourself or someone else that rewrote the context of everything preceding it. Today, these two forces form a sextile, a 60-degree angle of cooperative activation. The sextile is not a collision, and it is not a passive alignment. It is a doorway that requires something from you to open. Your presence, your willingness to receive without immediately translating what you receive into a plan. Jupiter and Uranus in sextile create the specific energetic condition for a cross-timeline recognition, a moment when what was once separated by wrong timing, by unreadiness, by the gap between what two people felt and what they were structurally capable of meeting with, suddenly collapses into the present, not as nostalgia, not as longing redressed, as recognition, the kind that happens in the body before the mind has assembled its defenses. And in this precise window, Saturn, the planet of structure, of what gets made permanent, of what holds and what breaks, sits in retrograde at 14 degrees of Aries, forming a trine with the Sun. Saturn retrograde does not undo what was built. It deepens what is real and dissolves what was only structurally maintained by conditions that no longer exist. What was solid remains. What was only held together by the pressure of unfinished business begins, quietly, to release. This is not the collapse of something that mattered. This is the clearing of what was holding the space that something which matters more is now ready to enter. This is not a coincidence of feelings. This is a precise cosmic mechanism creating the conditions for a specific kind of return. This portal does not open for everyone, and the reason is not about deserving, not about effort in any transactional sense. It is about readiness at a level most people never reach because most people, when the external confirmation stopped coming, stopped doing the internal work. Most people redirected. Most people found a way to make the not knowing comfortable by turning their attention elsewhere, by building something around the unresolved thing that made it livable. There is nothing wrong with that. But it is not what you did. What you did instead was stay in contact with something unresolved without collapsing it into something smaller to make it easier to carry. You did not need the silence to mean what you wanted it to mean. You allowed it to mean whatever it meant, held the uncertainty without converting it into a verdict, and kept moving through your life while carrying something that had no resolution attached to it. That was not abandonment. That was preparation. The preparation was not for a specific outcome. It was for the internal capacity to receive something real without immediately dismantling it through the urgency that old wounds produce in the body. And here is the second reframe that this window requires you to hold. That was not being overlooked. That was being protected. Protected from a version of this story that the universe could see clearly even when you could not. A version where arrival came too early, before the structural readiness existed in either field to hold what arrival would have required. And the third, that was not failure. That was calibration. Every moment that did not become the moment was the system calibrating to the precise frequency at which the genuine moment could be received without distortion. What you have built inside yourself through that process is not visible on the surface. It does not appear in how you present yourself, in how you speak about what you have been through, in anything another person could observe from outside. It is a structural renovation of the interior, a rebuilt relationship with uncertainty that no longer requires certainty as its precondition for stability. You can hold not knowing without converting it into urgency. That is what this portal recognizes. That is what it opens for, and you are standing at exactly that coordinate right now, not triumphant, not performing a rival, but genuinely, quietly settled in a way that has no theater in it. Now stay with this because what comes next explains the delay in a way that nothing else has. The universe does not delay because it is cruel. It does not delay because the timing is arbitrary or because the lesson needs more repetition to land. It delays with surgical precision because the universe can see from outside your timeline what would have happened if arrival had come before you were built to receive it correctly. If this had arrived earlier, 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, you would have arrived at the connection still needing it to answer something. still carrying the unresolved question of your own worth into the dynamic, still needing the other person's presence to function as confirmation of something you had not yet settled inside yourself. And that would have made the entire dynamic about that unresolved question rather than about genuine contact. You would have received their presence through the filter of that need. You would have interpreted everything through the distortion of what you were still trying to prove to yourself through being chosen. What arrives now can be received as connection rather than confirmation. That distinction is not small. It is the entire difference between a dynamic that functions as medicine and one that functions as another elaboration of the wound. The delay was not silence. It was the universe holding the door closed until you had become someone who could walk through it without immediately pressing it into the shape of what the wound required. Saturn governs these thresholds, the planet that does not open structures until both the lesson and the person are genuinely, not performatively, ready, not almost ready, not intellectually ready while still emotionally organized around the old need. Actually ready. The readiness is structural. It shows in how you carry the not knowing now versus how you carried it before. The silence was not their final answer. It was the universe's answer. And the universe's answer was, not yet, because the version of this that was available then would have cost you something you cannot name because you would never have known what you lost. The delay is now complete, not because time passed, because you changed. And here, on the other side of the silence, here is what is happening in their field right now. This person is not suppressing what they feel. They are not constructing elaborate rational architectures to explain the distance or the silence. They have moved past both of those stages, and where they sit right now is somewhere far more exposed, at the edge of action, held in place not by avoidance but by the full weight of what honesty would require them to admit. They know what they feel. The knowing has been present for some time now, not as a possibility to be evaluated, but as a fact that sits in the body with the particular uncomfortable permanence of something that cannot be unfelt once it has been felt fully. What holds them at the edge is not ambivalence. It is the magnitude of what they would have to say. The specific things they would have to acknowledge, about what they want, about what they have not yet said, about what the silence cost, about what they are prepared to offer now that they were not prepared to offer then. Today's transit makes the position at the edge increasingly untenable. Jupiter sextile Uranus does not respect the careful arrangements people construct to stay comfortable inside unresolved dynamics. It reaches into those arrangements and applies pressure at the exact point where the structure is weakest. For this person, the weakest point is not their feelings. Those are actually the clearest thing in their interior right now. The weakest point is the story they have been telling themselves about why they are not yet saying what they know. Today, that story is failing its structural test. The reasons that made the silence feel defensible, the timing, the circumstances, the particular flavor of not quite ready, are dissolving under the specific pressure of this alignment. Not dramatically, not in a collapse, in the quiet, unmistakable way that a certainty begins to erode when the conditions that supported it no longer exist. There is a physical sensation to where they are sitting right now, a particular quality of being caught between two impulses that have equal weight, the impulse to say what is true, and the impulse to wait for a version of saying it that feels less costly, less exposed, less final. The body knows that the version of saying it that costs nothing does not exist. The mind keeps looking for it anyway. This is not cowardice. This is the specific paralysis that arrives when someone is standing at the precise edge of a genuinely honest moment and feeling the full weight of what honest moments require. They are close. The recognition is active. The truth is alive in their field with a force that today's alignment is amplifying in ways their ordinary containment strategies cannot fully absorb. What they do with it is theirs to decide. But once that recognition ignites at this level of clarity, it does not go quiet. It only waits for courage to catch up to it. And you are standing at your own edge right now, a different edge, but an edge nonetheless. This is not a dramatic choice. It is a quiet one. The quiet ones always carry the most weight. There are two timelines available to you in this moment. They look nearly identical from the outside, the same life, the same circumstances, the same person. The difference between them is entirely interior, and the interior difference determines everything about how this window is navigated. Timeline A is organized around managing the outcome. In timeline A, you are working, even now, even in this moment of apparent stillness, to ensure that what happens next takes a specific shape. You are prearranging your response to various possible arrivals. You are constructing the version of yourself that will be most legible, most appealing, most likely to produce the specific resolution your mind has decided is acceptable. You are steering without the wheel being visible, even to yourself. The sensation of timeline A is a particular kind of exhaustion, the exhaustion of a system that has never actually stopped working because stopping work felt identical to losing control. Timeline B is organized around allowing. In timeline B, you are not managing what arrives. You are present to what arrives. You have done the internal work. The work is complete, not because you reached a conclusion about the other person or the situation, but because you reached a conclusion about yourself, about what you need, what you will and will not accept, what constitutes genuine contact versus its simulation. In timeline B, the outcome does not need to be steered because you are no longer afraid of what honesty might reveal. If what arrives is real, you receive it. If what arrives is a repetition of the old dynamic wearing new language, you see it clearly, not because you are guarded, but because you are no longer distorting the signal through the noise of need. The soul does not ask this question to punish you. It asks it because the answer determines everything that follows, not as consequence, but as direction. The distinguishing sensation between these two timelines is in the hands, not in the thoughts. The thoughts can be arranged to support either one. In the hands, timeline A grips, even when nothing is being held. Timeline B opens, even when the outcome is uncertain. The question that separates them is not, "What should I do?" It is this: can you allow this to reveal its own shape without deciding in advance what shape is acceptable? Feel that question in your body, not in the mind. If something in you braces against it, that is timeline A still operating. If something in you releases at the asking of it, that is timeline B becoming available. That question, sat with honestly, is capable of collapsing an old karmic cycle permanently. Now go to the deepest layer of what this connection was always about. You came into this dynamic carrying a specific agreement, not one you made consciously, not one you could have articulated at the time, but one your soul recognized as necessary. The agreement was this: you would love and you would engage, and you would allow yourself to be fully present inside the full weight of what you felt, and the dynamic would teach you, through whatever it required, the difference between genuine love and readiness. Not the right person. The simultaneous arrival of the right person and the structural readiness to receive them without collapsing the space the connection requires to form correctly. This is what soul contracts are. Not romantic arrangements, not agreements to be happy together or to complete each other, precise agreements about what must be activated, confronted, and integrated in the interior of each person before what they genuinely offer each other can be received without distortion. The connection came to teach you that love and readiness must arrive simultaneously to be real, that the right person at the wrong internal moment is still the wrong moment, not because the love is insufficient, but because the vessel is not yet shaped to hold it without immediately converting it into the answer to an older, unrelated question. Saturn enforces these contracts, not cruelly, precisely. The lesson does not end through time passing. The lesson does not end through the pain becoming familiar enough to be managed. The lesson ends when the integrated understanding, not the intellectual understanding, the cellular, structural understanding, has become the new ground from which the person operates. You know the difference now. You can feel the difference between wanting someone and needing them to complete something you have not yet completed in yourself. You can feel the difference between love that arrives from fullness and love that arrives from the hope that giving enough will eventually produce the timing you want. There is grief in recognizing this. Real grief, not the grief of something lost, but the grief of something seen clearly for the first time. The grief of understanding that what you wanted was never separate from who you were becoming through the wanting. That the wanting taught you something about yourself that nothing gentler could have reached. That the cost was real and it was also necessary, and both of those things are true simultaneously, and neither one cancels the other. Give the grief its paragraph. It has earned one. It is not weakness. It is the final, honest acknowledgement of what this cost and what it built and what can never be taken from you now that it is built. The contract was never a promise of forever. It was a guarantee of transformation. And completion, real completion, not the performative version, not the "I am over it" version that still requires the over itness to be maintained, looks like this. You can hold the timing question without urgency. You can be in contact with what you feel without immediately needing it to be resolved into a specific outcome. You can allow what is real to arrive in its own form and timing because you are no longer converting uncertainty into emergency. The work that contract required of you is done, not because the situation resolved. Because you resolved, inside yourself, below the level of what anyone else can see. What ends here is not the love. What ends is the version of the connection that could only exist while the lesson was still unfinished. The love, if it was real, does not require the dynamic to survive. The body already received this information before the mind had the language for it. You may have noticed this in the quality of your sleep, how it arrives earlier than it used to and leaves less residue in the first minutes of waking. Not the deep, insensate sleep of exhaustion, but the kind of sleep that happens when a system has stopped running its overnight emergency protocols. The stillness that is not numbness. You know the difference now, and knowing the difference is itself a shift. A name that used to arrive with a particular physical bracing, a tightening behind the collarbone, a held-inness that the body organized around without being asked, now passes through awareness with less damage, not with indifference, with something more like weather. Present then moved through without the body reorganizing itself around the arriving. The quiet in your interior has a different quality than the quiet that came from avoidance. Avoidance quiet has a background noise to it, a low-frequency management of something that is being kept from full awareness. This quiet is different. It has no urgency behind it. It is not the quiet of someone holding their breath. It is the quiet of someone who has stopped needing to. You are fully inside moments now in a way that was not available before. Not preparing for the next moment while still inside this one, not cataloging the current experience for later analysis. Present in the specific, rare way that presence becomes available when the interior is not organized around an unresolved emergency. Your body is not confused by this stillness. It is settling into it, recognizing it slowly as the new baseline. This is not shutdown. Shutdown has a flatness to it, a reduction of range. What is happening in your body right now is the opposite of reduction. It is the quiet expansion of a system that no longer needs to manage everything at once. When the body stops preparing for loss, it begins preparing for arrival. And as the body settles, the life around it begins to reorganize in response. Decisions that used to require extensive deliberation, not because they were genuinely complex, but because the internal conflict made everything feel high stakes, now arrive with a cleanness that surprises you. Not because life simplified itself, because the root of the internal conflict dissolved, and without the conflict, the decision reveals its natural direction without effort. This is not certainty in the overconfident sense. It is alignment. The difference between the two is that certainty is something the mind asserts, while alignment is something the body already knows before the mind has fully caught up. The things that used to require a decision no longer do. The body has already made it. Quietly, without drama, without a moment you can point to, it simply stopped being available for certain costs. Not because you decided to want less, because something in your architecture genuinely shifted and the new architecture cannot accommodate the old arrangements. What used to feel exciting but also somehow depleting, the kind of connection or situation that produced a particular high alongside a background unease you kept explaining away, now registers as hollow before it even fully arrives. The body identifies it before the mind has named it, not as a rejection, as information. The universe is no longer trying to guide you toward alignment. It is beginning to respond to the alignment you already carry. This is a different relationship with the external world than the one you had before. Before, synchronicities felt like nudges, the universe pointing towards something you were still trying to locate. Now they feel like confirmations. the directionality reversed. You are not searching for the signal is finding you because the frequency you carry has become clear enough to be located. Other people's energy is becoming legible in a way it wasn't before, not because you are more suspicious or more defended, but because you are no longer filtering what you receive through the distortion of your own unresolved wounds. What people carry now lands accurately, and accurate reading changes everything about how you move through a room, a conversation, a relational field. You are not becoming someone new. You are becoming undivided. And undivided people move through the world differently, not louder, not harder, but cleaner. And with that clarity comes the permanent structural shift in what the nervous system will accept. Being held at emotional arm's length by someone who knows exactly what they feel, who has full access to the truth of their own interior and chooses, nonetheless, to offer you only partial visibility. Your nervous system can no longer accommodate this arrangement, not as a decision made with effort, as a biological reality. The thing that allowed you to remain in that arrangement was a particular kind of hope. The hope that if you remained patient enough, present enough, understanding enough of why the withholding was happening, the person would eventually offer what they were clearly capable of offering. The hope has finished its work. Not because it was wrong to hope, because hope was never the variable that governed their choice. You can see that now without bitterness and without self-recrimination. Carrying the full weight of a connection while the other person remains comfortable in its ambiguity, remaining tethered and available and emotionally organized around a dynamic that the other person can set down whenever the weight becomes inconvenient. Your body has completed its education in what that arrangement costs. The cost is no longer abstract. It is specific, and the specificity has made it non-negotiable, like a key that no longer fits the lock it once opened, not because the key changed and not because the lock changed, but because the relationship between them shifted in a way that makes the old fit structurally impossible. This arrangement is no longer structurally compatible with the interior you have built. And waiting for honesty that someone has already decided you do not deserve, waiting with patience and with the particular generosity of someone who keeps finding new ways to explain the withholding to themselves, to contextualize it, to make it about the other person's fear rather than about what it actually cost you. That waiting has reached its natural terminus, not because you ran out of patience, because the part of you that organized itself around that waiting has completed the education that waiting was providing, and it does not need the curriculum repeated. This is not hardness. This is discernment made permanent by experience. Love does not leave your life after this. It upgrades. Everything that enters from here must meet you where you actually stand, which brings us to what happens when this soul steps back into your field. The question of whether they return is no longer the question that governs your interior, but the answer, when it arrives, will be legible, clearly, immediately, without the distortion of need bending the signal, without hope constructing a more generous interpretation of what is actually being offered, without fear producing a more catastrophic reading than what the reality warrants. You will see what arrives accurately, for the first time. That is not a small thing. The precision of accurate perception in a charged relational field, when history is present, when feeling is real, when the body has its own opinions, is one of the rarest capacities the internal work produces. You have it now. If they return, the first question is not, "Do I still want this?" You know the answer to that. The question is whether what returns is the same version of the dynamic or something genuinely different. Something genuinely different has a specific signature. It does not arrive explaining itself defensively. It does not arrive requiring you to make the arrival comfortable. It does not arrive asking you to minimize the gap or to perform forgiveness before you have had a chance to read what is actually being offered. Genuine transformation in another person arrives quietly and demonstrates itself through what it sustains, not what it initially offers. Sustained presence, not perfect presence. Sustained. You are not waiting for them with held breath. You are present, grounded, and capable of seeing clearly. If what returns is the same version of the old dynamic wearing new language, the same emotional availability issues, the same capacity for honesty only up to the point where honesty becomes uncomfortable, your body will know before your mind has articulated the verdict. The signal will arrive clean. And if what returns is something genuinely different, if they have done in their interior the equivalent of what you did in yours, that signal will also arrive clean. No projection, no distortion, no hope manufacturing evidence that isn't there, and no fear dismissing evidence that is. Both outcomes leave you whole, not as a consolation, as a structural reality. The version of you whose wholeness was contingent on their arrival completed its contract. What stands here now does not require the reunion to be complete. It is already complete. That is the shift that makes the accurate reading possible in the first place, because you are no longer looking at what arrives through the question of whether it saves you. Whether they arrive or not, you are no longer defined by which one happens. That is the shift. That is everything. If something in this message landed somewhere specific, not just passed through your mind but settled somewhere in your body, then do one thing right now. Like this video, not as a gesture, as a signal to yourself that you were present for this, that you received it consciously. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. These transmissions are timed. What activates here today builds directly into what arrives in the next window. And arriving there without having received this is like walking into the second act without knowing how the first one ended. And in the comments, write, "I receive what's real." Say it out loud as you type it, not for anyone reading, for your own nervous system. Words spoken with the full weight of their meaning complete something in the body that reading them silently leaves unfinished. Finally, if someone in your life is standing at a threshold they cannot quite name, share this with them. Not because you need to explain it, because your soul already knows who needs to hear it. Something has quietly arrived that does not need to announce itself to be real, not with fanfare, not with a dramatic signal, not with the kind of certainty that has to be maintained through effort, the kind that simply is, the way a door that has been sealed for a long time reveals on an ordinary afternoon that it is no longer locked. You did not force this open. You did not earn it through suffering or manifest it through repetition. You built in private the interior structure that made receiving it possible, and what you built is now the ground beneath you. Solid, already there. What comes next does not require you to prepare for it. It requires only that you remain exactly where the work brought you, present, undivided, and capable of receiving what arrives without converting it into something your old wounds would have recognized. The timeline that was always meant to exist is not approaching, it is here. What you carried through the long, unrewarded stretch of this, the months when the internal renovation was real but the external world offered nothing back to confirm it, was not wasted. It was deposited into the foundation of exactly this moment. Every time you chose the harder question over the comfortable explanation, every time you continued refining your understanding of yourself without any audience to witness the refinement, the deposit was made. And deposits of that kind do not evaporate, they compound. What you are standing on right now is the accumulated weight of every moment you kept going when stopping would have been reasonable, when no one would have blamed you for setting it down. You did not set it down. And what you are about to receive is not a reward for that. Reward implies a transaction, and this was never a transaction. It is simply what becomes available on the other side of that kind of sustained, unwitnessed, unrewarded internal honesty. The field does not negotiate with performance. It responds to what is actually true, and what is actually true in you right now in this precise window is more than it has ever been. That is not a small thing to arrive at. That is everything.